Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right. We are in our first week today of a brand new series called Chasing Carrots. If you could see that that dark graphic of the little hamster on a wheel chasing after a carrot. And the subtitle for this is really going to be what lets us know what's happening here, and that's the continual pursuit for more. The continual pursuit for more. This idea is so prevalent now around us everywhere. I find I struggle with some of this as well. If I could just get that, you fill in that blank. If I could just have this, I think then I could be happy. I think I could be completely satisfied if it were just that. If I just had that. And the reality is that I often discover that there are occasions, rare occasions, I actually get that. And I'm still not happy. Like it doesn't quite, it's like, well, it's, all right, that's good. But man, if I only had that. We find out a lot of times, it's kind of like when the, what happens when the dog finally catches the car? It's like, okay, now what? What do we do now? There's always something else. It feels like the stuff that we think we need, we got to have, and then we find out it doesn't really deliver. It doesn't hold up to the promise we thought it had. It just doesn't work. And we find ourselves in this constant pursuit, like a hamster on a wheel, chasing after something we're never going to get. And it just feels that way all the time. And over the next few weeks, we're going to look at some things that we chase after. We're going to look next week. Next week we're gonna look at money and stuff. Money and stuff. You'll have to come next week to find out what the stuff is. I'm hesitant. The next week I tried so hard to figure out a way to shovel this off onto Victor, but I'm going to be out of town the next week, and so I was like, okay, I can't do it. So the next week I'm going to have to deal with perfectionism. God's got a sense of humor, right?
God knows.
Then we'll look at approval the following week. The idea that we're constantly chasing approval. And then finally we're going to wrap up with comfort. Comfort. Oh, if we just could be comfortable. We're going to look at those over the next. But today I want to start with something that at first when I saw it, I thought, really? Is this an issue we need to deal with? And then the more I began to study, it's like, I think it might be. But today we're going to look at the idea of pursuing and chasing after fame. Fame. When I first saw the title, the first thing that popped in my mind, because I am a child of the late 70s and 80s. Oh, yeah. As soon as I saw that word, I heard fame. I'm going to, and listen, what's funny is I thought I knew, and then I looked at the lyric. This is what that song said. Fame, I'm going to make it to heaven, light up the sky like a flame. Hey, I'm going to live forever, baby, remember my name. Yeah. Now that, I could stop right there and just have an altar call. Because I think all of us get going. Here's the thing I began to discover. That show was actually really honest. Because it was a show about, for those of you young folk that don't remember the 80s, or were barely born or not born yet. So Nate is looking at me with this smug look on his face right now. And I'm going to look over here because I can't. It was a show based in, I think, a big city, maybe New York, I guess, maybe. And it was based around a performing arts school, okay, where students came and they learned drama and music and dance and all of the arts. was about that. It was the arts. And yet the name of the show wasn't The Arts. It wasn't Entertain Us. It wasn't any of that. They were brutally honest because they admitted that the whole reason for all of this was fame. Not to be the best actor you could be. Not to be the best singer you could be. Not to be the best dancer you could be. The point of all, in other words, they basically announced before the show ever started, the theme song basically told you, and the title told you, the purpose, the end result of all of this hard work is fame. And yet it wasn't a school for the fame to become famous. And yet that's what they said. This is the whole point. I know some of you may be saying this morning, I don't care. I'm not chasing fame. I'm going to get a good nap this morning but some of you do that anyway. But you might be thinking, I can kind of check out. This doesn't really affect me. So I just want to define it for a second, because I think sometimes when we start looking at what this really means, maybe it applies to some of us. So let's jump right in here and let's define fame. Let's define fame for a second. Defining fame. Here's just a few things that when I say fame and chasing after fame or being famous, this is what I mean. First of all, this one's kind of obvious. It's to be known by many. To be known. Just to be known. Just to be known. Now, can I tell you, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're what we would consider famous. Just means I want to be known. I want people to know me. I'll never forget when I first moved back to Charlottesville back in 1993. I had been enrolled in school, but traveling full time. You can do that math. The many drop classes on my hours and hours of transcript would tell that story. And after 3 years of being on the road and traveling, waking up in different cities every night and every morning, every night, that was probably closer to reality. Every morning you're in a different place, and there's times you wake up in the middle of the night and I didn't know where. It's like, what am I in my room? Where am I? You're just traveling all the time, constantly. And I enjoyed that for a while, but after that season came to an end, it was like, this is done. And moved home, got a job. At that time, Dad was planning a church out in Fluvanna County, and so they were renting a place at Lake Monticello. I was living out there, got a job working downtown on the downtown mall. And so for the first time, I was going to the same place every day. Every day. Wasn't traveling, it was the same place. And there was a bakery, might still be there, I don't know, things have changed so much. That was only 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Thank you, Sue, my math was failing me right there. 30 years ago. So I'm sure things on the downtown mall have changed a little bit. But there was a place I would park. My mom worked over off of High Street for a lawyer. We would commute in together, and I'd drop her off, and I'd go find parking over there in one of those parking lots, and I would walk down onto the downtown mall, and I would always walk down one of those alleys. It came out right beside this bakery, and they had the best chocolate donuts, like the good kind, like Dunkin' Donuts kind. And it was like chocolate cake kind of donut with chocolate icing on it. And I would get 2 of those and a large black coffee. And it was the highlight of my morning. It was like I did that every morning. And I will never forget, it wasn't long, maybe about 2-3 weeks after be working there doing this. I'll never forget walking in. And when I walked in one morning, the girl behind the counter looked up and she said, "Hey, do you want your usual?" I was like, I had not been in one place long enough to ever have a usual. For anybody to know who she knew who I was. She knew, and it was like this moment, like, wow, that felt so good. So sometimes I didn't mean to get into. I'm not going to spend this long on every one of these, but I want us to understand that when we talk about fame, it can be more than just be known. Just be known by many. Here's the second thing: loved by all. Loved by all. Now maybe you don't suffer with this. There's some of us that want to be loved by everybody. And can I tell you, as a pastor, that's a nightmare. Because that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't work. I know some of you in the past, almost 11 years now, there have been times where somebody didn't like something and whatever, and it's especially my first 3 months, first 6 months even, maybe the first year, there were times, because when I first got here, people came out of the woodwork. Everybody showing up. And then there were some that showed up, and I don't know any different. I just assumed they went here their whole life. Like they were just, faithful, regular, and then they kind of bugged out. They kind of came, checked me out, and said no thanks, and left. And it crushed me. I remember going to Victor one day and said, "Oh, I think so-and-so, I think they're gone." He went, "Okay." I said, "Well, I guess he said, "What do you mean we've lost them?" He said, "They've been here 3 times since you've been here in the last 2 months." He said, "That's more times than they've been here in the last 3 years." They don't go here. They just can't. And I realized, and it's still, I didn't get, he was trying to assure me, and there was a little bit of solace, but I still went home going, yeah, but I want everybody to love me. Here's the third thing. Accepted by your peers. Accepted. Can I tell you, this goes all the way back for me to middle school. I wanted to sit at that one table at lunch. I never was accepted at that table. I'm bringing up a lot of scars and hurts this morning. You're going to have to really... Here's the next one. Admired by others. We want to be admired. That's a great... it's like... It's a thing. And here's the last one that I wouldn't have put with fame, but it really is a part of this. Credit for work. Credit. I want credit. When I did something, I want the credit for. I want to be recognized for what I did. This one's tough. This one's a struggle. And I wouldn't have told you that I struggled with this one. So I know this one. This is one that's like glaring for me. And I'm like, no, I'll fight against that. I don't want to take credit. I'll never forget. And I even asked his daughter Ruth about this. And she said she never heard him actually say it, but it sounded just like something he would say, because I've heard this credited to Billy Graham. My favorite statement of his was we never are more like Satan than when we desire to take credit for something. And I remember telling Ruth that. She went, yeah, that sounds like Daddy. That sounds exactly like something he would say. So I'm gonna hold fast that I think that's a Billy Graham quote. But I love that statement. And I have known that, and I think I'm good with this. This one I don't have to worry about. I'm going to mention it this morning because there's probably some heathens out here that need to hear that one. But I don't really need that one. And then I get here this morning, and we're in this incredible time of worship, and I feel the Lord speak to me and say, there's a couple of people you need to go anoint with oil and pray for this morning. And I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, all right. I love when God speaks, and I'm just like, yeah, all this is going to feel good to obey God. And I look up, before I can even get up here, Victor's got the oil. He's going around and he's praying for the exact people God told me to pray for. And I'm going, now, come on. I want people to know God spoke to me to have them prayed for. And number 5 started jumping out and going, really? So you want to be famous. You want credit. Here's the beautiful thing. God speaks. And what I should have been excited about it was God speaks so abundantly. And God speaks to the body. And we're all here in one accord, like we talked about last Sunday. And prayer is being had. It doesn't matter if I'm the one doing it, or if I get credit for the one who heard from God. And yet that's what I was caught up in that moment. So maybe I need this message more than I thought. Here's the thing. Even if I read all 5 of those and you're going, yeah, no, I don't struggle with any of those. Can I tell you, somebody you know does. That's just the reality. Your kids, people you know, your peers, there's somebody. I read this study this week. I love these studies. This one was done. First of all, they asked 10 to 12-year-olds. 10 to 12-year-olds. Now, the stupid thing was, why? Why you ask a 10 to 12-year-old anything? That's like, I don't know why you would do that. But anyway, they asked him, they said, 10 to 12, they asked him, they said, what is your biggest goal in life? Now, can I tell you, this probably has drastically changed in the last few decades. Because I can tell you, in the past, it would have been firemen, policemen. You know, there would have been certain things that you'd have heard. This is it. What's your biggest goal? And when they asked them, they didn't get those answers. Now, this study was done, and this study was probably even more so now. This was actually done probably 2 years ago or so. And their answers were not, boy, I just want to be financially secure. You know, that was not their biggest goal in life. Not even achievement. Not even I want to be an astronaut. I want to be something great, policeman, fireman. It wasn't that. Not even I want to be successful in the community. I want to, you know, make a difference. Not that. The biggest goal, 10 to 12-year-olds, I want to be famous. I want to be famous. Now, before we start, you know, locking in, judging Generation Z, let's move back a little bit to most of you, okay? Like I said, this is a couple of years ago. It says 22 to 37-year-olds. The basic target for millennials would be basically what that's talking about. We could probably shift that and say right now, probably 20 maybe 25 to 40-year-olds. Somebody in that range. Matter of fact, let's have truth time. How many of you fit in that range right there? Yeah, there's a bunch of you here. Look around, look at them, scorn. Just look with scorn right now, scorn. When you people, this is what came out of your study. 50% of people in that age group thought that their life should be made into a movie. 50%. Now, I sense that some of you are on the other side of that, maybe, because some of you are going, you know. And then there's a couple of you that are going, because I shouldn't admit that. But I think, listen, 1 in 12 said they would disown their family if they could be a household name.
That's great.
1 in 9 said they would give up the idea of ever being married if it meant they could be famous. Some of you are going, well, you know. 1 in 6 said they would give up ever having children if it meant they could be famous. This number went up greatly depending on whose kids they were hanging out with that week. I think that kind of probably changes a little bit. Can I tell you this though? I mean, that sounds startling to me and it sounds whatever. Let me just say something. There is nothing wrong with being famous. There's nothing inherently wrong. Matter of fact, if you excel in any field, if you are one of the best in what you do, if you make a big difference around you, can I tell you that fame on some level is almost inevitable? It's going to be recognized. It's going to happen. And more importantly, can I tell you, the Bible backs this up, that fame in and of itself is not bad. Matter of fact, fame was something that God used positively. Just two people that jump out at me real quick. First of all, David, King David. Listen what 1 Chronicles says. Talking about David. 1 Chronicles chapter 14, verse 16. So David did what God commanded, and they struck down the Philistine army all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. Now, you may not know this, but Gezer, that's the first place that we ever have record of there being a retirement home. Verse 17, so David's fame spread everywhere, and the Lord caused all the nations to fear David. Not only does God not say this is wrong, there is a sense here that God allowed it, caused it, was behind it, said this is a good thing. He was obeying God and doing what he was doing and was famous. That's one little place. There's plenty of places where David's fame was there. That continued, if we want to look at somebody else, with his son Solomon. You think David was famous? Here's Solomon. Now we know Solomon, we talked about this when we did our series on Get Wisdom. We talked about, remember when Solomon the Lord came to him after he just got crazy and said, I just want to give God everything. He offered 1,000, some just unbelievable sacrifices all in one day. And God came to him that night and said, okay, Solomon, you know what? I can see you have a heart for me. What do you want? You name it, it's yours. Tell me what you want. And Solomon said, I want wisdom. And this is God's response. 2 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 11. God said to Solomon, because your greatest desire is to help your people, and you did not ask for wealth, riches, fame, or even the death of your enemies or long life, but rather you asked for wisdom and knowledge to properly govern my people. Verse 12, I will certainly give you the wisdom and knowledge you requested, but I will also give you wealth, riches, and fame, such as no other king has ever had before you or will ever have in the future. Can I tell you, if fame was inherently evil and wrong and bad, and we should shun everything, never try, fame is just bad, it's evil, it's wrong. Well, boy, God messed up here. Because it seems like he would have said, I'm going to give you wisdom, and I'm going to bless you, give you good health and riches, but not fame. That's bad for anybody. He didn't say that. He says, I'm going to give you such fame that no other king has ever been like you. You're going to be more recognized than anybody else. Solomon, can I give you one more example of fame in the scriptures? How about Jesus? You talk about a famous dude. I mean, I did a word search because I thought, I think people were around Jesus a lot. And I thought, it seems like the Bible talks about crowds following him. Have you ever read that one? You read crowds? Yeah, I see. So I looked up, do you know how many times in the Gospels that the word crowds, now the word that gets translated crowds a lot is the Greek word oklos. That Greek word is found and is translated into the word crowds, or some similar version of that in English, over about 100, almost 175 times, just in the Gospels. But before we even get to the crowds, listen to what it said, because the crowds are one thing. Anybody can get a crowd. You can get mobs and riots. But the places of hierarchy of government, Matthew 14:1 says this, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch, which is like saying he wasn't quite a king, but he was still a pretty high leader. Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus. Even people in leadership had heard about it. But then look what Matthew 8 said. Matthew 8:1. Large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. Matthew 20:29. As Jesus and the disciples left the town of Jericho, a large crowd followed behind them. Jesus had crowds following him all the time. Listen, you think he was not famous? And beyond just the crowds, it wasn't just, we said, well, crowds, yeah, but were they all wanting to crucify him at the time? Well, some places it says crowds, that was the case. That doesn't mean he wasn't famous. But listen to what this said in Matthew 21, the very next chapter, 21:11. And the crowds replied, it's Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. They knew his name. They not only were just following, they knew who he was. They knew what is. Can I tell you, this was fame. There's nothing wrong with fame. Well, then why are we here? Okay, because there are some dangers involved with fame, and specifically chasing after fame. Let's look at a couple of dangers first of all. Here are two things to look out for when we're dealing with fame, and we're talking about it. Here's the first one, the first danger with fame. Fame turns our heart towards self. The very nature of fame changes our trajectory. Instead of towards God or even others, it turns us inward. It has a way of doing it. It turns us away from God, away from others. Can I tell you this? The goal of Satan is not, and listen, I don't want to say this to lessen in any way the dangers of the occult or those things that we sort of see right off the bat and recognize as satanic. Some people see them more often. There are some people that can find satanic messages in everything. It's amazing. Go online, you can find them. I mean, Satan is everywhere. Satan, they give him way too much credit, in my opinion. And that stuff's real. Okay, listen, that's very real. I don't mean to say this to lessen it, but can I tell you the goal of Satan is not to turn your heart towards the occult. The goal of Satan is to turn you to yourself. And those who study the occult if you know somebody like that, will tell you that basically the occult winds up, it's really all about me. It's all about the exaltation of self, because that is the heart of Satan. He wants you to be like him. Just like God wants you to be like him, Satan wants you to be like him. And what was he? First and foremost, above everything else, he was about himself. He was about himself. We read this passage a few weeks ago. This is a prophetic passage out of Isaiah. Isaiah is talking about he mentions one of the kings there that he's prophesying to, but we know and recognize that he's actually speaking about Satan. And he says this, Isaiah 14, verse 12. How are you fallen from heaven, O shining star, son of the morning? You have, and that's not a question. I read that like it was a question. Oh, how you have fallen, is basically kind of saying. You have been thrown down to the earth, you who destroyed the nations of the world. For you said to yourself, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. I will preside on the mountain of God's far away in the north. I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High. The very heart of Satan is about self. And that's one of the biggest dangers about fame, is that it, more than anything else, can have that tendency to turn our hearts, our focus, our minds, all about self. All of those things we talked about, being known by many, being admired by others, being accepted by your peers, getting credit. Those things all come back to self. But here's the second danger. Not just it turns towards self, but the second danger is the desire for fame itself. Now, I mean this a couple different ways. First of all, it's kind of like, and we'll talk about it, I don't want to get too much into next week. This first week is very good because I'm dealing with some things that we're going to deal with again, and it's just going to unpack a little bit more. I don't want to get into too much, so we'll talk about this next week with money and stuff. But as we know, the Bible talks about money and says that money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's the same way with fame. It's not so much that fame is wrong. The desire for fame is what can be dangerous. That desire, and more importantly, the desire for fame itself. In other words, not the desire to be good at your job, and yeah, the result might be you could get famous, or you might be admired, or you might be accepted. No, I'm not talking about the results that fame happens from, but the desire to be famous just to be famous. It shows that desire, that pursuit of fame. That's what's dangerous. And here's the reality, and we alluded to this a few minutes ago, but the nature and the accessibility that fame has in our current culture has changed so much just in the last few years. The ability to be famous, the nature of what fame even looks like. In the past, in years past, and I find myself, the older I get, being more like, back in the old days, I remember back when, I used to hate hearing that when I was younger, and now I say it all the time. Well, yeah, I remember, but here's the reality. Back in the day, people got famous for doing something important. They got famous for, walking on the moon, okay? They got famous for kind of different things, their occupation, accomplishments, no matter what it was. I was struck the first time, and getting ready to go back over to Eastern Europe again in October. I'm starting to do some research and kind of remember some past things. And one of the first things I was struck with, one of my first times over in Europe, before, not necessarily the euro, but when each country had its own individual money, I remember seeing paper money in some of those countries, and I would always bring not something worth a whole lot of money value-wise, but I have a sort of a collection. It's the easy souvenir to keep when you get change and you don't change it out. You just bring it home, and it was like, and so I'll occasionally I'll run into that when I'm cleaning out a drawer every decade or so, and I'll come across and I'll look at it, and it's like memories a little bit. Pull up, and I'll try to see if I can remember without reading. Try to read the language on it. I'll try to remember where that's from. Oh, that's Romanian, or that's, this is Italian, or this is French, back when they all had their own currency. But one of the things that always struck me, when I was in those countries, I would see these pictures on it, like we have pictures on our paper money and or coins, same way. And I would ask him, I was like, so who is this? You know, and almost inevitably, the pictures on the money in those places in Europe were poets, writers, inventors, scientists, people who had on some level had accomplished something. And it was so different for me because here we pretty much put pictures of people who were famous that got elected to something. Their accomplishments, they might have done good things. They might have done good things to get elected. They might have done good things once they got elected, but basically they're on the paper because they got elected. Or some never got elected, but are famous. Matter of fact, one of the most famous pictures on our money, you very hear anybody say, well, because it's not worth as much, but you don't hear anybody say, hey, you got a Lincoln? You know, nobody says that. You know, nobody says, well, the two I hear a lot, one is Benjamin. You got Benjamin's. Well, he was never even a president. He was actually, but he was famous for a lot of things. Him and I, as much as I hate Hamilton, you know, you say, you know, you got a Hamilton, but that one not so much even more. It's mostly Franklin. And I'm struck by this because it's amazing how our culture in the West especially is even more geared this way. To where now, but that used to be the way. Now, fame, you don't even have to get elected to be famous. You don't have to do this. Things are very different. With the rise of social media and those kind of things, now you can get famous just for posts, for putting out content. It doesn't even have to be good content. It can just be silly content, stupid content, things, crazy stuff. If it goes viral, okay, and I don't mean like in a COVID way, but similar. I mean, that's where that word comes from. But in the sense that it spreads, it's like it goes viral. People, if it gathers a bunch of likes and shares, that's how it goes viral. That's when that happens. And now people are famous. There are people that are famous, and there are thousands, even, yea, I say millions, that will follow and watch and spend time watching somebody else play a video game. I can't comprehend that. That's how they're famous. I feel like I cheated my kids by not making them play games when I shouldn't have told them to go outside and play. I should have made them stay. You stay inside and you work on those video games. There are some that are famous because they're a cute little kid and people like to watch them open up packages. There's one lady, and I am proud to say I've heard about this, I've never seen it, never watched it, definitely don't follow it. There's one lady that is famous because she smashes her face in bread. I can't make this stuff up. I can't do it. I did hear this story, and this is just an example, whatever. So here's how this happens. Because some of you people that I think can trace your roots back to the ancient town of Gezer. Some of you, when I say go viral, you're still going, so they got sick, they had a cold, I don't know what you mean. Okay, so let me explain how that works, all right? So there's this kid, this is a few years ago. There's this kid named Alex. And Alex he's got a job. He's young, teenager, but he's got him a job. And he's got a job working the checkout at Target. Zoe's smiling. You know Alex? You know who I'm talking about? You know the story. Okay. She remembers back in the olden days because this is an old story. This kid named Alex, he works the checkout at Target. And he's there. He's checking people out with all their trans satanic goods they're buying. And he's checking people out at Target. And this girl, on this particular Sunday afternoon, this girl sees him in the checkout line and thinks Alex is kind of cute. She's like, oh, look at the cute checkout guy at Target. She takes a picture and posts it. Check out Alex, the cute checkout boy. Well, her friends agree with her. They share it. Then their friends share it. Then their friends share it. It turns into a Breck shampoo commercial. And they told some, and then they told some, and then I'm really dating myself today. And they began, and this is back when X was still called Twitter. They began to tweet and retweet and retweet and share and share it and begin to share the photo. So here's the reality. Here's what that looked like. Alex is on Twitter, okay? And when he went to work on Sunday afternoon, he had 144 followers. 144 followers. And I know some of you went, wow, 140. Yeah, that's not really. That's like grandma and some family. I mean, that's really not much. That's not much. 144 followers. That's what Alex had when he went to work, okay? When he got home that night, by Sunday night, he had 300,000 followers. Because people would see the picture and then they would follow it, and they'd see his picture, and it more and more and more and more. That was by Sunday night, over 300,000 followers. Monday morning, Alex was on CNN. Because it had become such a phenomenon in just a few hours that CNN, and it doesn't surprise me with the coverage that they have. That's like that was news. We got to put this guy on TV. We got to hear the story about Alex. What did you do, Alex? Did you save a puppy? Did you rescue a child from burning car? Did you resuscitate your grandma and saved her life? No. What did Alex do? He went to work and checked out goods, and he was kind of cute. And people went. Can I tell you, fame is different now than it used to be. You used to have to do something. But what that means is, and this goes back to explain why 10 to 12-year-olds say, well, what's your goal in life? I want to be famous. Because now there's this reality that it just takes one break, one viral post, one little thing, and I could be discovered. I sing once. There are people that have been offered millions of dollars in record contracts. You used to have to move to Nashville or California or somewhere and starve and do some things and work as a waiter or waitress, and you had to go through a bunch of stuff and try to get discovered, right? We all know those stories from the olden days. Oh, I remember when Cecil B. DeMille walked into the diner and he saw, I'm going to make you a star. It's like that's kind of what it used to be discovered. Now there are people being offered millions of dollars because they sang in their bathroom with the guitar and put it on YouTube. And people have seen them, and it's like, and they see that it's become quantized. You can actually make somebody's, I don't know how to be verified to make thousands of dollars making YouTube videos. I don't know. Can I tell you this though? Social media is not all bad. It is possible to use that platform for good things. Some of you are part of things where social media has been used to raise thousands of dollars for people that need it across, in places that we couldn't reach otherwise, to get stories out. And every once in a while I'll come across one of those stories where somebody sees somebody that's happening and they're going through something that's tough, and somebody will post about it, and it's this. The next thing you know, there's a and they're incredibly blessed. And they become famous, and it's good. They make a difference. People make a living. It's not bad. But just like with money and like with wealth, Jesus said it's very difficult for somebody that's very wealthy to become a follower, to be part of the kingdom. He didn't say impossible. He said it's just hard. So we need to work and look at these dangers, because fame can be dangerous. It can point your heart away from God. It can create a desire that's not for what it should be. So I don't want to leave you with just dangers. Let's wrap up with 2 solutions. What are 2 solutions? There's probably more than 2, but just I want to look at, if those are the 2 dangers, let's look, and we'll work our way backwards. So if the second thing we mentioned was the fact that it creates that desire, it really deals with motive. Here's the first one. Here's the first solution. We need to honestly question your motives. Honestly question your motives. And in case that's like, what is that? Let me give you a couple of questions to honestly assess yourself. Here's the first one. Who do you represent? Who do you represent? Now, as a Christian, I think most of you know what that answer, but when you do this, is why I said honestly question your motives. Because if we're not careful, we can fall in that thing where we're not honest with ourselves, and we say to ourselves, when we ask ourselves the question, we say the thing we think we're supposed to say. You know, we give the answer we should give. It's like the little Johnny was in kids' church, and the teacher said, you know, okay, let me ask you a question. What's brown, has a big fluffy tail, climbs trees, and stores up nuts for the winter? Anybody know what that is? And well, Johnny raised his hand and he said, well, that sounds like a squirrel, but I'm going to say Jesus. Because he's in kids' church, and he's like, I think the answer is supposed to be Jesus, but I don't know. It sounds like a squirrel. But can I tell you, when you answer, if you are not honest with yourself, and I'm bad about that, you know, you've got to honestly ask those questions. Honestly ask, who do I represent? Because I want to say Jesus, but the reality is, a lot of days it's me. I'm representing me. I'm promoting me. It should be Jesus. But ask yourself that thing. Because the reality is, most of the time, I'm worried about what will you think about me. Not what do you think about Jesus. And it comes out in a lot of different ways. I knew when I was typing this out, and I almost typed it in, I didn't, because I thought, no, I'm not going to tell that. And I knew when I got to this point, I was going to wind up telling this. There was it's been a couple months ago now. And I'm getting older, can't remember stuff like I used to. I got up, I can't remember if this was a Saturday night, and I was getting ready to preparing, or if it was a Sunday morning, I can't remember. But I was getting ready to get dressed, either laying out what I was going to wear to church or whatever. Well, see, church has changed for me now. You know, since COVID. Used to be I just had to worry about what you thought. Now I've got to worry about what y'all think. And just when I forget, you know, that this gets broadcast and put online and goes a lot of places, Annie will come home and say, I ran into somebody at the grocery store. I've never even met him in my life. And they said, hey, I love your husband. And she was like, excuse me? Like, and like there's people that I don't even realize that watch this. Or I'll get a message from one of them, I say kids, he's now married with 2 kids, but it's been 2015, 8 years ago since I was there. But one of at the time, the young kids from over in Nepal will message me and say, good message today, Uncle. I started to say Pastor, they call me Pastor, they call me Uncle. Good message today, Uncle. And it's this realization, oh wow, lots of people are seeing this. So that's on my mind a little bit more now than it used to be. But I got up to get ready, and I was getting ready to pick out something to wear, and I was like, wait, what did I wear last week? Did I wear the same? Can I tell you, I actually got my phone out, went to our YouTube channel, and pulled up the last several Sundays, and was mortified when I discovered, scrolling through there, that there was, this has been a few months ago, there was like a Sunday, I wore the exact same thing. Like it wasn't this very next Sunday, but like, it was like one Sunday, and then 2 weeks later, I wore the exact same thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. Now, Pat, listen, it's easy to forget that we as believers in Christ represent Him. We don't represent ourselves, and yet it's easy to slide into those things. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with worrying about your appearance or those kind of things or whatever. But there was one Sunday that I was needing, in the back of my mind, I thought, I need to look, there's a verse that I feel like I need to share, and I don't have it in my notes, but I need to look that up. And I was running out of time, and I was spending more time. I can't believe it. All right. Annie's going to watch this tomorrow morning and come wake me up and go, you know what? I can't believe you said that on there. But I was spending more time trying to make sure that the top of my sideburns were even. Because I felt like one was a little higher than the other. And I was like, oh, I actually went and got my reading glasses and put them on to see if, because then it was to see if this was high. Did it touch? Yep, that one's touching, that one's not touching. Let me get, I'm trying to fix it, whatever. And I stopped, thought, you're running out. You've got to go find that scripture that God told you to speak about. And I realized in that tiny little silly moment, I'm more concerned with the fact somebody might realize, now I'm going to be doing this all day. Stop looking at my, okay. Then you're more worried about that than worried about speaking what God wants you to speak this morning. So we've got to be honest with our question. This is what Paul said, the Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians 5:20. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. He calls us ambassadors. An ambassador is the representative of that country in whatever nation they're at. He's saying, Paul uses that word because he's saying, you as followers of Christ are the Christ that people will see. You speak for Christ. Your actions, your words, your deeds speak for, you represent Christ. Ask yourself that question honestly. To check your motives. What are my motives here? And am I wanting to represent Christ or am I wanting to exalt me? Here's a second question we can ask. Whose approval matters? Now, I'm trying to be careful here because I don't want to deal with approval because we're going to unpack approval in a couple of weeks. And you might hear some of this again. That's okay. You probably all need to hear this several times. We should have the same answer here, right? Whose approval matters? Should be Jesus. That should be the answer. We should be living for God, not the approval of people. We shouldn't care what other people think, but it's obvious that I apparently do a little too much. I think all of us fall into that. I read this week. A psychologist said this. The desire for fame has its roots in injury and neglect. The desire for fame has its roots in injury and neglect. All of those things we talked about that make up fame tend to come from a place of insecurity. Wanting to be known, wanting to be accepted, wanting credit. All of those things. The reality is a lot of us sometimes feel insignificant. We feel like we don't make a difference. We feel like we're never going to amount to anything. Maybe we struggle to please teachers, parents, whoever it is. Maybe we feel rejected by people, by friends. We feel overlooked. And what that drives us to is we want to be known. We want to be noticed. We go and instead of asking whose approval do I really need, we live life saying, do you like me? Do you recognize me? Do you validate me? Do you accept me? Who's that famous Oscar speech from Sally Field when she won her first Oscar? And she gets up and she got right to the point. She explained out loud, whether she meant to or not, why she was so happy in that moment. She got the Oscar and she held up and the first thing she said was, you like me. You really like me. And you think, you were worried about that? Like you're Gidget. What do you mean we like you? How can you not like Gidget? I mean, come on. You're the flying nun. Everybody loves the flying. Yeah, and yet in that moment you saw, she questioned that. She finally somehow felt validated and was expressing, wait a minute, what? You like me. Maybe it's like that. Maybe your desire for fame isn't, your motives aren't real obvious like some of those. Maybe I've heard this referred to as micro cravings. You have micro cravings for fame. It's not anything serious, but it's little things. Here's a couple I read this week that I thought were interesting. Micro cravings are like this. You don't walk around like desiring for people to know you're kind of under, others. But you can't say no to anybody. Because ultimately you want to please people. Because you want to be loved by everybody. So it's not when I ask you, if I were to ask you to date, so you want to be famous? I don't want to be famous. But you ain't never said no to anybody. You do everything anybody asks you to do because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You don't want to ever make. Maybe it's not overtly fame, but it's micro cravings for fame. Or maybe you're extremely oversensitive to criticism. Because you fear rejection so much and you want to be accepted so much that any kind of criticism, it's very difficult for you to see as anything positive or constructive. It's always something's wrong. All right, enough about me. This is what Paul said in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. For we speak, and this is the earlier passage when he says we're ambassadors, he's speaking to the church in Corinth. Here he's speaking to the church in Thessalonica. But he says something similar. He says, we speak as messengers approved by God to be entrusted with the good news. Our purpose is to please God, not people. He alone examines the motives of our hearts. And then in verse 6, as for human praise, we have never sought it from you or anyone else. Paul is saying here, the people that represent me, that come to visit you and those kind of things. We know there were several. He lists them in here. He says, we're about being messengers of good news. We're not about pleasing people. We're about pleasing God. We've never sought praise from anybody else. So first of all, the first solution is to honestly ask yourself and question your motives. Where does my desire? What am I looking for? What am I trying to accomplish? Who do I represent? Whose approval matters to me? Ask those questions. Here's the second solution. Keep your heart turned toward God. Look, if a danger of fame is that it turns our heart to self, then the solution is to always set our heart towards Him. That's the solution. Set our heart towards Him. Okay, well, what does that look like? I think a great biblical example of that is John the Baptist. John the Baptist, we know, is the son of Elizabeth and Zacharias, Jesus' cousin, as it were. I don't know what order, first, second, once removed, something, I don't know how that worked, because his mom was Mary's cousin. Mary had Jesus, Elizabeth had John, so they're cousins on some level. John's life took a different trajectory. John was known as a crazy prophet. He wore animal skins, ate locust and honey. He spent most of his ministry preparing the way. He was sent to prepare the way for his cousin Jesus. And he preached, repent, 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 repent. Change from your sins. He was baptizing just John the Baptist. I heard somebody say this week, what did John the Baptist and Winnie the Pooh have in common? The same middle name. But here's what John said about this is how he lived. First of all, he said, I'm here. And when Jesus showed up, he literally said, look, this is the Messiah. I'm not even worthy to tie up his sandals. I don't even deserve that job. That's how much greater he is. That's how John lived his life. There came this story at one point. John chapter 3, verse 26 says this. John's disciples came to him and said, Rabbi, the man you met on the other side of the Jordan River, the one you identified as the Messiah, is also baptizing people. And everybody is going to him instead of coming to us. I mean, his followers, John had some disciples, and his disciples were very concerned. This Jesus that you baptized, we got it. That was a powerful moment, but now everybody's starting to go to his church. Well, they're all going over there. And he's baptizing people like you do. What in the world? What are we going, And this is John's response, verse 27. He replied, no one can receive anything unless God gives it from heaven. Verse 28. You yourselves know how plainly I told you. I am not the Messiah. I am only here to prepare the way for him. It is the bridegroom who marries the bride. And the bridegroom's friend is simply glad to stand with him and hear his vows. Therefore, I am filled with joy at his success. And I love this, and this is the verse, it's an easy one if you want to memorize it this week. He must become greater and greater, and I must become less and less. He must become greater and greater, and I must become less and less. Now, how do you keep your heart turned toward God? We must be less, and He must be greater. We must be less, He's got to be greater. John gave us the solution. He gave us the roadmap. He has to be greater. I've got to become less. More of Him, less of me. More of Him, less of me. That's the solution. You want to keep your heart set on Him. You want to keep your heart set towards Him. Live that way. More of Him, less of me. This is what David said, Psalm 115. I assume it was David and then the psalmist. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name goes all the glory for your unfailing love and faithfulness. Not to us, but to you, O God. To you, O God, goes all the glory for your unfailing love and faithfulness. Less of me, more of Him. Less of me, more of Him. My friend Bob Sorge wrote, and there's an incredible book he wrote called Dealing with the Praise and Rejection of Man. And he talks about the fact that there was nobody on this earth ever, since then or before, that was more rejected than Jesus. Jesus was rejected in such a way that just beyond what we could ever imagine. He suffered rejection. And when I began to study, how could he live with that? How could he deal with rejection? And he got my attention because, oh man, I wrestle with that. I can't stand to be rejected. That's just, it's a struggle. And he said, how could he do it? He said he dealt with the rejection of man because he never accepted their praise. When you open the door to receive praise from man, the door is now open for you to receive their rejection. You don't want to have to deal with you want to be able to deal with rejection from people? Don't receive their praise. Now, listen. I'm not saying not be gracious. I'm not saying don't. If somebody comes and you do something well and you do a good job and, oh, thank you so much. You did such a great job with that. Thank you. Oh, Melinda, you sang so good at chapel the other day. It was so good. I really enjoyed that. Melinda, don't Jesus juke him. Don't look at him and say, oh, no. That's all God's glory. All for Him. It's all for, don't. Just be gracious and say thank you. Just say thank you. But in here, you need to be saying, thank you, Father, that's all you. That's not me. They heard you singing through me. They witnessed your anointing through me. That was you. You gave me this talent. You gave me this ability. You make sure you don't accept the praise. More of Him, less of me. More of Him, less of me. Got to function that way. John talks about this when he says that he makes this reference and says we are a friend of the bridegroom. Now we look at that in a Western context like we're the best man. And that's very little responsibility. I mean, that means show up, maybe don't lose the ring, maybe plan some activities the night before. I mean, it's like there's not a whole lot of responsibility. Mostly just make sure the groom gets there in one mind, somewhat. Make sure, but in his context, the friend of the bridegroom actually is the one that took care of the bride. The friend of the bridegroom, the best picture of that was that eunuch that took care of Esther getting her ready to marry the king. And the friend of the bridegroom was somebody that was constantly getting the bride ready and saying, listen, here's what the groom likes. He loves you. I got to teach you how to make apple pie because that's his favorite too. We got to learn that. He loves it. His favorite color is red. We're going to find you some red stuff. They were constantly getting the bride ready for the groom. They were constantly pointing the bride to the groom. And so when they stood next to the bridegroom, they had been the friend of the bridegroom because they had gotten the bride ready. John is saying to us, the bride of Christ are His people. People in general, He wants them to be His bride. He says, your job is to get the bride ready for the groom. Your job is to get people ready for Him. That means everything you do should be pointing people to Him, should be preparing them for Him. Can I tell you, sometimes if we're not careful, when it deals with this area of fame, we can be guilty of flirting with the bride. Because things that are belong to give Him praise, we want to take for ourselves. And we literally get in the way. When you begin to live a life for God and you point people to Jesus, and people can see the Jesus in you, it's going to make you look impressive. You're going to be the answer to everything they had. You're going to have the answers because God is going to work through you. As you read that a minute ago, we are His ambassadors, right? We are His messengers. He's going to use us. He says He wants to use you to spread the good news. So when somebody's in a place and they're in trouble and they need help and they're wrestling, and you come and you bring the answers. You've got Jesus, right? So you come and you share Jesus with them and they find it. Do you know what's going to be the temptation of them? They're going to see you as the answer to their problems. Oh, you saved my life. If you hadn't come and told me about Jesus, I don't know where I would have been. You are the greatest thing in the whole world. And if we're not careful, we can get in between that relationship that should exist between them and Christ, and we don't become a good friend of the bridegroom. Instead of pointing them to Him, we want to take a little for ourselves. And that desire for fame, that direction, that trajectory that turns towards us, that's what Satan's been doing since the beginning of creation. Don't you want to be like him? You're good enough to be like him. Did he really say? John says we're to be a friend of the bridegroom. Not to us, O Lord, but to you be all the glory. The psalmist in Psalm 102. My life passes as swiftly as the evening shadows. I am withering away like grass. But you, O Lord, will sit on your throne forever. Your fame will endure to every generation. This is the mindset of less of me. Less of me. I am nothing but withering grass. I'm here today, gone tomorrow. Here today, gone tomorrow. Or, when Bugs Bunny visited Mexico, he said, I'm here today, gone tamale. Whatever sticks with you, live that way. I'm withering grass. I won't be here long. He will reign forever. I must be less. He's got to be more. I never thought I'd get to a message and close with a quote from such a theological scholar as Jim Carrey. This is what Jim Carrey said, the actor, the liberal loon. Anyway, he said this: I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. Even he recognizes that. Here's the bottom line. We are not called to be famous. We are called to be faithful. It doesn't mean you won't be famous. It doesn't mean God exalted people. God will do it. He will put you in a place you need to be for whatever it is. But He's never asked you. He doesn't say, through the parable He taught about the talents, we see how the response we're going to get at the end of days. Jesus made that very clear. And He didn't say at the end of days you're going to get there and here's what you hope to hear. Well done, good and famous servant. That's not it. Well done, good and faithful. He's asked you to be faithful. You may or may not be famous. That really doesn't matter. I love this quote. We do not live for the applause of man. We live from the approval of God. Not for the applause of the crowd, but from the approval of God. We're not striving to become celebrities. We are submitting to become servants. It doesn't matter if people know our name. You need to remind yourself that He knows your name. He knows your name. Isaiah 49:1 says this. This is, in chapter 49, Isaiah is actually talking about his calling. how God called him. He said, listen to me, all you who are in distant lands. Pay attention, you who are far away. The Lord called me before my birth. From within the womb, he called me by name. There are so many differences from Moses, to his story, to Jacob. There's so many of these stories where God would actually say, and I know you by name. I know your name. Can I tell you, God knows your name. He knows you by name. He knows you. Even the heavens have heard of you. We talk about the resurrection story. You ever realize that the angel at the tomb who's talking with Peter calls him by name? He says, Peter, don't you know? Like, not only does he know your name, he talks about you. I heard this story this week, I'm guilty. Football season is finally back, and I'm in a happy place. And I watched 4 games yesterday. I only cared about one of them, but still enjoyed the other. And I heard this story. He's a commentator now. He's kind of polarized. Some people love him, some people don't. But he does play-by-play or color. I don't know what. I think he does the color commentary. A guy named Chris Collinsworth. And I'm old enough to remember when he was playing in the NFL. He played for the Bengals. And he was an All-Pro wide receiver, tall guy. He could catch anything. And just the Bengals were terrible, but he had a great career. And he said he remembered, and back in those days, he was talking about an era when I actually lived near Pittsburgh, so I kind of really followed the Pittsburgh Steelers at the time. It was back during their dynasty era, late 70s and early 80s. And he talked about one time when they played the Steelers. Now, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, big rival already, and Pittsburgh was just dominant, and Cincinnati was terrible. And he at the time, his quarterback was a guy named Kenny Anderson, and he said, we got in a huddle, and Kenny said, I want you to do a slant route, which means he's going to go up about 5 or 6 steps and take a hard left and cut right across the middle of the field. Now, the problem with that is there's a linebacker that camped out in the middle of the field named Jack Lambert. And Jack Lambert was a beast. He was mean. He was missing teeth in the front, and he had them that he would wear, and he'd wear them for games. And I've seen pictures of him standing, waiting for the play, and he would intentionally bite his lip and bleed. And he would just stand there with blood running out of his mouth, just looking like, He was just this ferocious, and you did not want to get hit by Jack Lambert. Now, when you're a receiver and your quarterback tells you, you've got to run across the middle of the field, that means I'm going to be running, looking at the quarterback, and not looking at Jack Lambert. I'm going to get hit by Jack Lambert. He says, I know. And he said, I got to the line, and I thought, you know what? I ain't afraid. I'm in the NFL. I'm not afraid of nobody. I can play with him. I can play. He said, I got up there, got my confidence up. Said he hiked the ball. I took my 5 or 6 steps, got the hard left. I come across the middle. He said, Jack Lambert hit me so hard. He said, I knocked the breath out of me. I'm on my back. I'm like, oh, I can't breathe. He said, and he didn't just hit me. Now, this is a different era. He said, after he hit me, he went to get up and he leaned on me. He said he put his forearm right in my throat. He put his knee somewhere else. It wasn't very nice. And he grabbed my face mask. And he looked as he's drooling down into my face. And he said, Collinsworth, if you come across the middle again, I'm going to kill you. And he shook him and got up and walked off. He said, I got up. So I was walking limping back to the huddle. And one of their players, Anthony Munoz, was the star tight end for the Bengals then. He's looking at him, he said, I came back, got this huge smile on my face. And Anthony Munoz, he looked at me and he said, dude, what are you smiling about? He said, Lambert, I thought Lambert killed you. I didn't think you were going to make it back over here. Why are you smiling? And he said, I looked at him and I said, Jack Lambert knows my name. Can I tell you, you can go through almost anything if you just remember and recognize He knows your name. He knows who you are. He sees you. He knows you. He calls your name. All of heaven knows who you are. Even Satan knows your name because God calls it out. He knows your name. He knows you. That's what matters. That's the kind of fame that matters. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. We are not called to be famous in this world. We're called to be faithful to Him. That's what matters, and that's what will happen. And if you will submit and be faithful to Him, He will make you famous. We shouldn't desire that. We shouldn't want that. We shouldn't seek that for itself. Now, you might be famous for something that you don't want to be famous for, unfortunately. I still have people come up to me that I haven't seen. Some I have seen. Some that I see all the time. And I'll have people come up to me and they'll say, I still don't know how in the world. How are you still standing? I mean, it's been 10 years. And people still marvel. Can I tell you, I'd rather not have that kind of fame. I'd rather not be known for that. I'd rather have Maggie here than to be famous for what God brought us through. But God didn't call me to be anything but faithful to Him. And He has used the tragedy and the hard times in my life. He has used it to make an impact on the lives of so many people. So many people that have increased and put their faith and grown their faith in Him because they've seen an ambassador of Him. Be faithful. God will use you. And when times are hard and when things are rough, remember He knows your name. That's what matters. That's what matters. Will you bow your heads with me? Father, I thank You so much for loving us, for knowing us. I thank You that even when we are not faithful, You are faithful. Even when we don't live maybe the way we should, You never leave us or forsake us. When we turn our hearts and repent, turn to You, You are always there. Always there. Help us today to not desire anything but You. Help us to live a life that sees less of us and more of You. Less of us and more of You. Lord, I pray for those today that are maybe making that choice for the first time to deny self and say, I don't matter. I'm a sinner. Without You, God, I'm nothing. I am nothing if I don't have You. Forgive me. Cleanse my heart. Change my direction. I repent. I ask You to forgive me. I want You to be the Lord, the authority in my life. Help those of us that follow You today to live like it. To live from the approval of who You are and not for the applause of the crowd. Help us to put our focus on You. Keep our hearts set towards You. To question our motives every day and make sure we're living the way we should live for the right reasons. And You, God, increase. You become great. Help us make You great. Help us make You famous through everything we do. We give You praise, Father.